Many of us want beautiful plants in our landscape. We also want to promote the survival of our native wildlife. In tonight's program, we will first view the previously recorded program from homegrownnationalpark.org website presented by Doug Tallamy. When it comes to understanding relationships between native plants and wildlife that depends on them, Doug Tallamy is the acclaimed expert. He's a professor of entomology and wildlife ecology at University of Delaware. He's the author of several books, Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope, and most recently, The Nature of Oaks, all of which are available in the SLO County Library. In this video, Doug will present the grassroots science-based solution to the biodiversity crisis and explain why it's so urgent. Hopefully, this will inspire you to consider including some native plants in your landscape. You may even decide to register your plantings with homegrownnationalpark.org. It's totally free and sends a message that you are one of many who are trying to save biodiversity 1 yard at a time. So it's a national park. We all know that national parks are terrific, but there's not enough of them to actually save all these species that we want to save. We need to join in, and since the US is mostly private property, if we are contributing, we can actually help to save some of the species. So this is just a brief overview of his ideas. In this video, we will see it's about 25 minutes. If you wanted to see a longer one in more detail, I have one that's about an hour and a half long that you could watch on your own, and I'll include the link in the chat. It's called How Gardening with Native Plants Helps Wildlife, a California Focus. Just a word of warning, there is a little feedback in the video at the very beginning, but if you bear with it, it will go away. And now for the video of What's the Rush, Doug Tallamy. This is that website. It's called Homegrown National Park. And the solution, plant native. And this is how to get on the map. So let's watch Doug's talk.
A being I saw in my yard last summer. Looks like a fecal sac that a bird dropped out of its nest. If you take a closer look, you say, well, gee, maybe that's a spider. Look at it at night. Indeed, it is a spider. It's a bola spider. And this is how bola spiders hunt. They drop a single strand of silk. Somebody's got a mute out there, I think. And they put a little sticky glob of glue at the end. And it looks like they're going to go fishing with it. Well, I didn't think this spider would be able to catch anything, but a few minutes later it did. A moth flew in and it got caught on its sticky glob of glue, wraps it up in silk, has a nice meal. And if it does that enough time, it has the energy to create an egg mass. And that's exactly what this spider did. As a matter of fact, she made 3 egg masses. So how does she catch a moth like this? Well, she's actually releasing the sex pheromone of particular species of moth. I wanted to know what the species was, so I unwrapped the things that she was catching, and it turned out it's the bronze cutworm. She caught 10 bronze cutworms in a row in my yard, and I've got bronze cutworms and the caterpillars that create a bronze cutworm because I've got goldenrod. That's their favorite host plant. And the tree I was looking at was an oak tree, which produced this beautiful moth, a dot line white, and I've got dot line whites produced by this tree in my yard because I didn't rake the leaves away, because there's a dot line white cocoon in this little leaf mass right here. And there it is. I'm sure you saw it right away. Here it is up close. If you rake them away, you've just thrown away that beautiful moth. I've got evening primrose moths in my yard because I've got evening primrose. And the moth comes and spends the day with its head stuffed in the flower. It's very cute. I've got zebra swallowtails because I've got pawpaws that I planted there for that exact reason, to to attract that beautiful moth. It would take me a week or more to describe all of the species that are now calling our property home because of the plants that we have put back there. It would not take me a week. It wouldn't take me very long at all to describe all the species that are living in a landscape like this, a typical suburban landscape. There is no goldenrod, so there are no bronze cutworms, so there are no bola spiders. There are no oaks, so there are no dotline whites or hundreds of other species. There are no pawpaws, so there's, oh, give me a break. I don't know why I do that. Here we go. So there are no zebra swallowtails. Sorry about that. There are no enotheras, no evening primroses. So we have no evening primrose moths. There is very little life that can live in a typical landscape like this. And of course, you know that. But that is why we're seeing some pretty scary headlines. The insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. A third of our North American bird population is already gone. 2/3 of Earth's wildlife is gone. 1 million species face extinction in the next 20 years. 40% of Earth's plants face extinction. These are big problems, folks. These are big problems. And they're problems because we have not shared the planet with the natural world. We're taking the resources for ourselves. And that's why Elizabeth Kolbert gets to write The Sixth Great Extinction. I'll bet she would have been happier if she didn't have to write that book. Jason Hinkle says, biodiversity loss is such a strange euphemism for the mass destruction of non-human beings. It's the genocide of nature is really what we're talking about. So what's our reaction to these sobering statistics? People are actually studying that. Richard Hobbs wrote a paper about it. He likens our reactions to the 5 stages of grief that we experience when we get typically a news of a terminal illness. First, there's denial. We certainly have plenty of people denying that we have a problem at all. Then there's anger. I feel a little bit of that sometimes. Bargaining, depression, I feel a little bit of that sometimes too. Then the final stage of grief is acceptance. And this is where I take issue. Acceptance is too easily equated with giving up. And giving up's not an option, folks, because nature is not optional. We absolutely need it. So we need a 6th step here, and that is action. That's what Homegrown National Park's all about, taking action. And we do have existing national parks, and they were created primarily because they had exquisite scenery. They were beautiful places. Teddy Roosevelt said, we've got to preserve these places because that's good administration. Natural beauty is a national asset, and recreation produces good citizenship. So our parks were created largely because they were pretty places in which we could play. And that's why we only have about 12% of the US that's formally protected. These dark green areas are where we have our major parks because there's not all that many places that are exquisitely beautiful where we can play. What's happening outside the parks, though, has been appalling. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's natural resources disappears to development. Development, I think it's the most oxymoronic word we have, certainly in the field of ecology. We've got over 40 million acres of lawn. That's an area the size of New England dedicated to an ecological deadscape. And an even deaderscape is what we've paved over. We've paved over an area larger than Ohio. There are 2 million acres of golf courses. That's an area larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. And we could go on talking about many other statistics. Now, Matt Lee Ashley has observed that evaluating the condition of nature is a bit like watching a leaking pipe. If a person focuses on each drop as it falls to the floor, the leak doesn't seem very damaging. But if you leave for a day and you come back, your room is going to be full of water. And that's exactly what has happened. And we talk about an extinction crisis. It is indeed an extinction crisis, but I don't think extinction is the right metric that we should use. We have an extinction crisis, but we have to think about the degradation of common species. Species like the picture you're seeing here, this is the American chestnut. Used to be the dominant tree in our eastern deciduous forests from Maine all the way to Georgia. It's not extinct yet, but it's functionally extinct. It is wiped out by the chestnut blight. The rusty patch bumblebee used to be one of the most common bees in North America. Now it's a big deal if anybody sees even one of them. So it's functionally extinct. Beavers, now beavers are making somewhat of a comeback, but they used to be common in every stream system of the entire country. Their elimination drastically change the hydrology of the entire country, and it wasn't for the better. So we're really talking about defaunation. That's the real problem. It's local and it's everywhere. Enter E.O. Wilson, Harvard emeritus. Everybody knows Edward O. Wilson spent his life studying lots of things, but he certainly was trying to save biodiversity. And probably his biggest contribution in that regard was this book that he wrote in 2016, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And in this book, he noted that in order to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet. And if we don't do that, it's going to just disappear everywhere. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't tell us a whole lot about how we were going to do that. Now, fortunately, and somewhat to my surprise, people are actually listening to his Half Earth initiative. The UN has created a global initiative. First, the 30 by 30, we're going to save 30% of the planet by 2030, and that's step one going towards 50 by 50. So the UN is doing what the UN does. They get a bunch of people together and they're negotiating how we're going to protect biodiversity. And it's not going any better than all the negotiations about climate change have gone. Can you imagine negotiating whether or not we're going to save life on planet Earth? Well, that's exactly what the UN is doing. And everybody's got this notion in their head that we're actually going to save 50% of the Earth as pristine ecosystems. How could this be possible? Well, it can't be possible. It's not possible. Half of planet Earth is already in some form of agriculture, certainly not pristine. We've got 7.9, soon to be 8 billion people in the other half, along with all of our infrastructure and our detritus. There isn't 50% of planet Earth that is still pristine. So how can we realize EO's dream? Well, actually, I think the answer is obvious. We're going to need a new approach to conservation, and it's not about putting pristine areas aside. It's about restoring the areas that we have destroyed, and we're going to do that by finding ways for humans and nature to coexist. In the past, we've had this idea that they cannot coexist. But what I have been arguing for a long time now is that coexisting with nature is now the only viable option that's left to us. We absolutely have to find ways to do that. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. So we now need to practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. And I'm not just talking about conserving what's there, I'm talking about restoring what is already lost. So in other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. So if protected areas are not large enough, we're going to have to practice conservation outside of those protected areas, outside of preserved areas. So we're going to have to practice conservation in areas like this, but also in areas like this. And as Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young once said, if you can't be with the nature you love, love the nature you're with. I might break into song if I think about that too much. Where are we talking about? We're talking about private property. 78% of the US is privately owned. And 85% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So we have to practice conservation on private property. And lawn is the low-hanging fruit. It's really what got me thinking about Homegrown National Park to begin with. We have more than 40 million acres of lawn. That's a 2005 statistics, so we know it's bigger than that now. And you know, it is a leftover from the class system, the aristocracy of Europe. We're the only ones who could afford lawn, and so it's a status symbol, and we love our status symbols. Dedicated to an ecological deadscape. So I know we need lawn for high status, and we need lawn to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we replanted half the area that is now in lawn? That's the idea I had way back in 1987. That would give us 20 million acres that we could put towards conservation right at home. We could create Homegrown National Park, which will be huge. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountain. Add up all those parks, it's still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. I started talking about that in my talks for years. And then I finally, when I wrote Nature's Best Hope, I included it as a chapter. But, talk is cheap. That's pretty much all I do. And then I did meet Michelle, and she talked about how how this started. She came up to me after a talk and said, you're just talking to the choir. And I said, yes, it's only the choir who invites me. And she said, well, you're not going to succeed unless you get beyond the choir. You have to use social media, you've got to use marketing, and you've got to do all the things that I know. She was correct. I said, I don't do those things. And she said, I do those things. So let's do it. And that's where homegrownnationalpark.org came from. The ideas you see expressed here are all Michelle's. What are we asking in Homegrown National Park? We're saying we need to reduce the area in lawn. That is the low-hanging fruit. We've got to put more natives into our landscapes, and we've got to remove the invasive species that are already there. Our product is national awareness, not just of what the problem is, but what the solutions are. We're going to change the culture. We're going to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not something we should do. It's something we absolutely must do. And it's everybody's responsibility to do it. And the map, once it's fully operational, will allow us to measure our conservation progress. It'll be a powerful scientific tool. Homegrown National Park is going to convert hope to action. We need action. It's aspirational. It doesn't rely on governmental support. Not that we would turn it down if anybody offers it. It's going to merge existing conservation efforts like Audubon and National Wildlife Federation and Wild Ones. We're not, it's no paid membership here. We're not stealing members from anybody. We're uniting them so that we can all have one visual in terms of our progress. And that visual will reveal holes in our biological corridors that we're going to need in order to connect the wild places that remain. So what we're envisioning is something like the COVID maps you see on the New York Times, where each county will be colored in with the progress it's making. This is a simulation, of course, but we're talking about a science-based grassroots call to action that can address the two major problems we have in this on planet Earth. We've got climate change, but we've got a biodiversity crisis, and Homegrown National Park will address both of those simultaneously. So what's the rush? Well, remember these statistics. They're not waiting. They're coming every day. There is great urgency in enacting this Homegrown National Park solution. We've got 48 million residential landscapes in the US. If we add 1,000 properties to Homegrown National Park each month, it sounds like great progress, but it'll take us 4,083 years to reach all of them. So that's not quite fast enough. If we look at that in terms of property size, the average lot size in the US is 0.3 of an acre. So if we add 1,000 acres to Homegrown National Park each month, it'll take us 1,200 years to convert all landscapes. Ooh, somebody's got to mute. So who's going to help Homegrown National Park make this rapid transition? The problem is most people do not garden themselves. They just hire somebody. It's not that they don't like nature or they don't like gardening. They don't have time. They're raising kids or doing other things. So they hire somebody. So what we need to do is create the person that they're going to hire. We need to create a team of skilled ecological landscapers. There are groups doing that now. We need more of them. They need to do it faster. Every place I go to give a talk, people say, who can I hire? And I usually don't know. But once this team is in place, these people are going to have the information that everybody needs. Ecological landscapers are going to know that every landscape has 4 ecological responsibilities. It's got to support food webs so that we have functioning ecosystems. It's got to sequester carbon, get that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It has to manage our watershed, and it has to support pollinators. And they're going to know that lawn accomplishes none of those goals. So our fascination with the lawn is going to end. They're going to know that plant choice matters. There are 3 kinds of plants out there: contributors, non-contributors, and detractors. A contributing plant is one that's helping to enhance local ecosystems. It's going to be a native. Some are much better than others. A non-contributor would be something like ginkgo biloba from Asia. It's not an invasive plant, but it contributes very little to ecosystem function. And a detractor would be an invasive plant like calorie pear, which becomes an ecological tumor. It escapes and pushes out the native plants in our functioning ecosystems. Ecological landscapers are going to know that caterpillars are an essential component to our landscapes. They are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. And they're going to know that keystone plants are keystone plants because they support the most caterpillars. Just 14% of our native plants are supporting 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs, which makes keystone plants essential components of the ecological houses that we're building. They're the support system. Our house isn't going to stand up without keystone plants. We've been trying to build ecological houses out of wallpaper for the last 100 years, and that doesn't work. They're also going to know that insects are the little things that run the world. E.O. Wilson's famous statement. They're going to know that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat the particular plants for which they have the adaptations to get around their particular defenses. So think monarch butterflies eating toxic milkweeds. Very few other insects can do that. You take away the milkweeds, you take away the monarch butterflies. They're going to know that we need pollinators, but they're also going to know it's not because they're pollinating a third of our crops. You hear that every day on the news. It's actually about a 1/12 of our crops. But then people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Everybody needs pollinators because they're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. Losing our pollinators is not an option unless we want to lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. They're also going to know that light pollution and mosquito fogging are two of the major causes of insect declines, and they're fairly easily reversed. If we put in yellow bulbs instead of our white bulbs, it's going to decrease insect loss to light pollution, and we can, of course, fire Mosquito Joe pretty easily. They're going to know that tiny properties can be very important in terms of conservation. It can happen on any size property, right from a flower pot on up. And most of all, they're going to know that conservation works. It's going to make it worthwhile. And I'll give you just one example of what's happened at our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is what it looked like when we moved in. It was part of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. And had been mowed for hay. Very little life there. As a matter of fact, where it wasn't mowed for hay, it was nothing but invasive plants. That's my wife Cindy there, getting rid of these invasives. It can be done. This is what it looks like today. And once our research showed that the number of moth species you have in your local food web is a great index for how healthy that food web is, how complex and stable it is. I started counting the moth species that have come to our barren landscape since we moved in, and I am up to 1,140 species of moths, that's 44% of all the moths that occur in the entire state of Pennsylvania. They are there because we put the plants back. And because so many of them are types of bird food, we now support 60 species of birds that have bred on our property, not flew by, but bred. But is reducing the lawn enough? That was the low-hanging fruit, but if you look at the numbers, there are issues with that. We've got 1.9 billion acres in the lower 48 states. Less than 12%, or 228 million acres, are protected, so not very much. That leaves 1.6 billion acres unprotected. Now, 78% of that, or 1.3 billion acres, is privately owned. If Homegrown National Park restores 20 million of those acres, that's only 1.53% of what really needs to be restored. So our goals are too modest. We have to increase them by doing more than shrinking the lawn. Most of our privately owned land is in small woodlots, cropland, and rangeland, and we want to get owners of all those properties in Homegrown National Park as well. There are 406 million acres of woodlots managed by private citizens, not logging companies, in the US. If they're managed properly, by managing the invasives in those woodlots and by sustainably harvesting those woodlots, they all should be on Homegrown National Park. This is where our croplands are. 410 million acres are now in cropland. Big area, but there are things that our farmers can do. We can restore the native plants on the edges of the fields. We can put in prairie strips. We can restore hedgerows that have been removed, and we can stop using neonicotinoid pesticides. All of those things will vastly increase the biodiversity in our farmlands. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland, all of which could be good habitat if it's managed properly. We overgraze an awful lot of it. That, by the way, is 4.5 times the size of Texas. If we restore the riparian corridors that go through those rangelands, research is showing that that restores the biodiversity over the entire area. Very doable. Now, there's something that's common to each one of these conservation approaches. I learned this from one of my students in a class last semester. In a paper she wrote, she said, we claim to be managing species and habitats, but what we're really managing is people. And that's what we're talking about with Homegrown National Park. We're managing the people that own all of this land. It has been degraded because of the way we've treated our land, but we can also restore it. So we're talking about changing the culture. We've mentioned that, but it's so important. Right now, it's an adversarial relationship with nature. We must change it to a collaborative one if this is going to work. So what's the rush? We're rapidly destroying the natural world that supports us. Our parks and preserves are not enough. So we got to practice conservation outside of parks and preserves on private property. Global conservation initiatives, they sound good on paper and the UN's talking about it, but we can't wait for them to actually come up with actionable recommendations. We've been waiting for climate change and it's just not happening. So the power and responsibility of Earth stewardship really resides in the individual, each one of us. That's a new message to most of the people on the planet. Our challenge is to make this a reality, to make it part of our culture. Can we do it? I think we can. We don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but we can save it where we live. And if we're doing that, we certainly need to join Homegrown National Park. It empowers each one of us. You know, the Earth's problems are huge and most people feel absolutely powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can do all the things we just talked about. They can shrink the lawn, they can put in a pollinator garden, they get rid of their invasive plants, they can turn out their lights, they can fire Mosquito Joe, they can shrink the lawn, do all the things I forgot to tell you. One person can do that and totally revitalize their local ecosystem. And it shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the planet that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, you help somebody who does. So Aldo Leopold said a number of wonderful things. And one of them was, there are some who can live without wild things and some who cannot. Now, I know he was talking about the emotional connection with nature, but actually no one can live very long without wild things, for it's the wild things that keep us alive.
I hope you enjoyed that one. And I hope you got a little bit of hope for the planet and see that we all do have the ability to make our planet better. So that was, I believe I put that on a link, homegrownnationalpark.org, if you want to learn more about it. Okay, I have a short video. We don't have to do without beautiful nature and flowers in our yard. If we we can still plant native plants. We can color our yard with California native plants year round. So this is a UC Marin Master Gardeners, Bonnie Marks and Bob Mauceli will show us how, and many of the plants, almost all of them, grow here on the Central Coast. So let's take a look for how we can start planting some of those gorgeous plants and helping the planet.
Morning, Bob. Morning. Hey, buddy. How are you? The garden looks so beautiful this morning. Well, it's coming along. You know, when we moved to this hillside in northern Marin, I was determined to have year-round color, but I also wanted to have a garden of mostly native plants. Native plants understand our climate, most need less water than non-native species, and survive our drought years. And they provide a habitat for beneficial birds, butterflies, and insects. It seemed to me one way I could help our native wildlife survive the extremes of climate change.
It makes total sense to use the plants that evolved here in California, and there are so many to choose from. In fact, I know that we can recommend colorful native plants for every season. Let's start with spring.
I don't know anyone who doesn't like ceanothus. Some people call them California lilac. It's interesting. There are 41 species in California, and they are site-specific, like that one. Ceanothus come in many shapes and sizes and can handle full sun or part shade. Some stay only a foot tall but spread 6 to 8 feet wide. Others grow as much as 20 feet tall, and there's everything in between. They might ramble as they please, drape over a wall, become a hedge, or be trained into a tree. Most ceanothus are evergreen, but the thing that makes them stand apart is that most have striking blue blossoms from late winter to early spring, and that is rare in nature. That helps make ceanothus one of the most satisfying native plants for home gardeners. Another native for home gardeners is clematis. Most people don't know that there are 3 native clematis, and all have large white flowers like these. Depending on the variety, the vines can grow 15 to 30 feet, bloom in late winter through spring or even into summer. I have 2. One grows on the stairway here, and the other grows on a trellis over there and blooms a little bit later than this.
I'm going to add 3 more suggestions to our list for spring. Verbena lilacina de la Mina, lupin, and seaside daisies. The verbena is a perennial that can grow to a height of a picnic table and almost as wide. It has dark purple blossoms with lavender streaks. Lupin is usually blue, but it also comes in pink, lavender, and yellow, and it can be tiny or a shoulder-high shrub. Some are annuals and some are perennials. They really add fragrance to the garden. The seaside daisies are native to the coastal beaches and dunes, but do well in our gardens as well. They're small, about 1 foot tall and 2 feet wide, and they have lavender flowers with yellow centers that bloom from winter well into July.
Okay, now let's talk about 2 native plants known especially for summer flowers, penstemon and salvia. There are actually over 100 different types of penstemons native to California. Some are tall, others are small, but whatever size, they have clusters of tubular flowers in red, lavender, or blue. Salvia or sage have red, lavender, blue, or white flowers on plants that mostly have scented leaves. They're evergreen and can grow 3 feet tall. Some like the sun, so others like the shade. So there's a sage for everyone.
I have 3 summer favorites to add to the list: the California sand aster, buckwheat, and these beautiful clarkia. I added California sand asters for their beautiful lavender-tipped, silver, daisy-like flowers and evergreen leaves. Buckwheat's there not only because it attracts pollinators, but gardeners can choose white, pink, yellow, or red-flowered varieties. The buckwheats grow low, are evergreen, and they can spread to up to 3 feet wide. Clarkia is another plant with lots of varieties. It's usually an annual, and it might grow as tall as waist-high. The flowers are poppy-like, but in shades of lavender, pink, and red. They typically start blooming in late spring and finish before fall.
For fall, I have one favorite, the Rogers red grapevine on the fence here. I love it. It can be fast-growing and vigorous. My vine is 30 feet or more long, and the pollinators were all over the flowers in the spring. I don't know how the grapes taste. The birds get to them before I can. But the best thing is the autumn leaves. I can't wait for the leaves to turn deep red in the fall. Bonnie, what do you like for fall?
I like seeing the California fuchsias in the fall, and the hummingbirds love it. It's perennial, low-growing. It has red flowers that will start at the end of summer and continue through fall when other flowers have stopped blooming. It spreads by rhizomes and it can self-seed, so it can occupy a really wide area. But I usually cut it back after it flowers.
Okay, let's do winter now. I love my manzanita. You know, there are 100 different kinds of manzanita in the wild, in different sizes from ground cover to 20 feet high. In the garden, manzanita do best in hillsides or other places with good drainage.
One of the wonderful things about native plants is that many give us color in the winter when few other plants are blooming. I have 3 to add to our winter list: ribes, garya, and toyon. The evergreen toyon is typically an 8-foot shrub that flowers in the spring, but around Christmas it produces bright red berries like a holly tree. In fact, some people in Southern California mistook toyon on the hillsides for holly trees, so they named their town Hollywood. Toyon can tolerate more summer water than some native plants, sun or part shade, and many types of soil. It's really a good addition to an existing non-native garden. The ribes varieties can be low-growing, fan out into a small shrub, or grow to 13 feet tall. Some drop their green leaves in summer, but from winter to springs, they give hummingbirds cascades of small pink and sometimes yellow flowers. And some ribes have tiny yellow currants that turn black when they're ripe. The thorny ribes produce gooseberries. One more winter plant would be the evergreen garya. It is a knockout. It can grow 16 feet tall by 10 feet wide, and it has long, creamy silk tassels.
So there we have it, a mostly native plant garden with color for all 4 seasons. And the blooming time of these plants will depend upon rain and other conditions, which can produce some interesting overlap. That's something that I always look forward to.
As master gardeners, we talk a lot about the need to design earth-friendly gardens that help us by saving water and help the natural environment by providing habitats. I can't imagine anything more earth-friendly than growing California native plants.
For more information, visit the UC Marin Master Gardener website. And happy planting!